Hi, this is Street Life, and I'm Natasha, back at it with a discussion of Till. This is a condensed version of the review for Till that's featured on my other YouTube channel and podcast, Noir Histoire, which is about Black history and culture. Till is a 2022 new release. October 28th is actually its wide theatrical release date. The film is directed by Chinonye Chukwu about the lynching of a black boy and his mother's fight to get justice for his murder. In the summer of 1955, Emmett Till, played by Jalen Hall, left his home in Chicago and traveled south to spend some time with family in Mississippi. Raised by his mother, Mamie Till-Mobley, played by Danielle Deadweiler, a chance encounter and perceived breach of social protocols leads to the boy being brutally murdered. In the midst of her grief, Mamie uses her son's murder to bring attention to the injustice committed against him and also other black people in the Jim Crow South. The film starts off with a glimpse into Till's life as a boy in Chicago. It's different. Often when there's discussion about Till, it focuses on his murder and the aftermath. You usually don't get much insight into him as a boy as far as what his life was like prior to his murder. But we see his mother sit him down, warn him about what to expect down in Mississippi. As being from Chicago, he's unaware of their social expectations. His mother's very apprehensive about him going to Mississippi, feeling that she's got to start letting go and giving him more freedom to explore and be out in the world. But just imagine that moment, saying goodbye to your only child, with some apprehension, especially if there's potential danger in the place he's headed, to hug him, see him off, and that's the last time you see him alive. And then came the unfortunate moment of Emmett crossing paths with Carolyn Bryant in the store. I took issue with how the scene was presented. Emmett was said to have had a photo of a white woman, possibly like some movie star, in his wallet, and showed it off to his cousins as supposedly being his girlfriend back in Chicago. A petty, far-fetched lie that I could see a teenage boy telling. But it's presented here in the film as that he showed Bryant the photo, commented on her appearance, and wolf whistled at her as he was leaving. This implies that Emmett was being forward or like inappropriately flirtatious, and Bryant took offense. Given that Carolyn Bryant would later admit to lying, it seems that whatever, if anything, took place did not warrant what happened to Till. The way it's being presented can be argued as victim blaming, and without knowing more about the situation, people might regard this inaccuracy as fact and have an inaccurate perception of what took place. The idea of a teenage boy doing something foolish and having it result in his torture and murder is way too much. It kind of goes back to this thing of black boys and black girls not being seen as children. Something that would be dismissed as childish or immature on the part of any other child is here seen as a major transgression and worthy of threatening death. As kids sometimes do, Emmett and his cousins hid what took place from the adults, feeling or at least hoping that nothing else would come from the situation. In the middle of the night, there's suddenly noise, light, and movement outside the house in Mississippi. Uncle Moses gets up and goes to the door, not knowing what's going on. The kids eventually wake up as well, with Emmett seemingly being the last to wake up. His cousin actually calls out to him multiple times before he wakes up, and by that time, the men are in the house, having pushed past Uncle Moses. Imagine that you're at home, in your bed. Men barge in to grab one of your family members, and there's nothing you can do about it because they could just as easily kill everyone in the house. And even when they're gone, you might as well forget about calling the police. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy, keyword boy, and grown men came to grab him out of his bed. A boy. I can't even imagine how he might have felt in that moment of terror, and to then have to make that phone call to inform his mother. I know that with films like this, it's difficult to please everyone. Sometimes the history of black people is sanitized to the point of causing these incidents to lose context. But in other instances, it can feel like a filmmaker or storyteller is relishing their telling of violence being done to black people. Here, I actually appreciated Chukwu's decision to imply the torture of Emmett rather than showing it on screen. First, because the actor playing Emmett is a boy, and while a professional, I don't think child actors should have to endure scenes of that nature. Secondly, the aftermath of Emmett's torture was shown in what became a historic photograph. I think the story of how those images came to be does his and his mother's legacy a greater service than depicting how he sustained those injuries. It would be difficult and almost impossible to show him being beaten, shot, otherwise tortured, and then dumped in the river without without having it veer into trauma porn. This telling of the story of Emmett Till feels more human because it's told through the experience of his mother. We see and experience the occurrence of these events primarily through her eyes, but also that of other family members. As much as is possible, it asks us to not just sympathize with the characters, but to go further and empathize with them, to put yourself in their shoes and imagine this happening to your son, stepson, grandson, cousin, nephew, etc. That you put your only lively and vivacious child on a train to allow him some freedom to independently see and experience a bit of the world. And he comes back to you on a train, but in a box. How do you prepare for something like that? How do you endure something like that? The mortician warns Mamie and Jean about what they're going to see, but it's also a warning for the audience. I knew what to expect, but still felt caught off guard. And Mamie's time alone with her son was heartbreaking. It brought tears to my eyes. Under normal circumstances, Emmett's face and body would not have been displayed via photos or an open casket. But given the nature of his murder, his mother opted to show the world what racial hatred had done to her son. It's fitting that before the funeral, she pinned photos of him in life to the lid of the casket. Those lively pictures of a living boy were in direct contrast to the disfigured and mangled body laying in the casket. This was the aftermath of the acts of violence done to his body. Having just buried your son and now shifting focus to trying to get justice for his murder, you're still dealing with nonsense. For her safety, arrangements are made for Mamie to stay in the all-black town of Mount Bayou. There, she would be under the protection and care of Merle and Medgar Evers. Mamie and her supporters arrive at the courthouse where Emmett's alleged murders are set to stand trial. They enter the courthouse and are frisked quite roughly. You would think that this woman whose son has been murdered would be granted a bit of grace. Not to say that you wouldn't check to make sure she isn't carrying a weapon, but that you would be a bit more gentle and courteous. But to add to that, the sheriff, in addition to manhandling Mamie, is also like just throwing around the N-word. Wanting to see the places where her son spent his last moments, Mamie asked to be taken to Money, Mississippi. She also visits the uncle and cousin that Emmett had been sent to stay with in Mississippi. The boys have done nothing wrong but feel guilt and apologize for what happened. While in the house, Mamie notices a shotgun hanging from the wall and goes to speak with Uncle Moses. The two have a pretty honest conversation with each other about this specific situation and what it's like for Black people living in the area in general. Mamie is initially upset that Uncle Moses had a shotgun and didn't use it to defend Emmett, but as Uncle Moses explains, he has one shotgun, but there were two men that came to the door and entered the house. We as the audience see that there are at least another 3 to 4 men in the truck when they make Emmett get in. Even if he somehow managed to kill the 2 men who entered the house, what was he supposed to do about the others in the truck? And the reality is that he wouldn't have had to contend with just the men who came to the house that night. It was those 2 men, the others in the truck, and the rest of the system of white supremacy. If he killed all of the men present, he would still have to deal with possibly every and any white man in town. And given the Black guys in the truck that night, possibly some of the Black locals too. It would be the sheriff, judge, and the rest of the entire system against him, not just 2 individuals. As expected, the court case is just absolute nonsense. Not its acting or depiction, but rather the way these people just got up on the stand and lied whenever their mouths were moving. Who's supposed to uphold law and order is called, he disputes the body being that of Emmett Till. He then goes on to suggest that this is like some conspiracy cooked up to make the South look bad. Here you have an agent of the local government actively working to defend white supremacy and terrorism. Mamie gets on the stand and then shares some insights into the son that she loved and raised for these years. It helps to further humanize him as her as well, kind of taking them off this historic pedestal and presenting them as normal human beings who were forced into the spotlight. Deadweiler is great throughout the film, but this is one of the scenes in which she truly shines. You then have Carolyn Bryant testifying, if you want to call it that. But I have nothing good to say about this woman and her lies. Nothing against the actress. She does a good job in the role. It's like her mouth is moving and there are nothing but lies coming out. And as her testimony progresses, her claims just become increasingly outrageous. I was annoyed listening to this so-called testimony, and apparently so was Mamie, as she gets up and decides to just leave. The entire court case is a farce. It was powerful, though, that as she prepares to leave town, the Black people they pass on the streets nod in acknowledgement. It's sort of like a shared camaraderie that they have. To see her then use this experience to help people relate to what's happening in the South and all that came scene from that is inspirational. The performances by the entire cast are solid. Danielle Deadwyler, the actress playing Mamie, is absolutely amazing. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click that thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.